Welcome to the Guitar Roads podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Cooper, and my guest today is the legendary, dare I say, infamous Jennifer Batten. She first gained notoriety in the guitar underground of the early 80s with a very original and over-the-top guitar style. A graduate of the Guitar Institute of Technology, she's been a touring guitarist for Michael Jackson, Beck, and has also been inducted into the Guitar Players Gallery of Greats. And today continues a very successful career as both session musician, performer, instructor, and solo artist. Jennifer is going to be in Bend Friday, November 6th at Sunday Guitars to host a guitar clinic starting at 3:30, followed by a performance later that evening. Jennifer, thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, thanks for having me. Good to be here.
So I want to just jump right into it and start from the beginning. What was your, early musical upbringing like? And what kind of got you interested in the guitar?
Well, it was two things. I started when I was 8 years old, and my sister had a guitar and I didn't. So jealousy was the number one driver. And number two was the Beatles. They were the hugest thing on the planet at that point, and especially in this tiny, small town in upstate New York that I grew up in. All my friends were into the Beatles, so anytime there was a new record that came out or anytime they were on the Ed Sullivan Show, everybody was glued to their TVs. So it was, and plus my dad was really into music, not professionally, but he played guitar and he had a party band in the town. So I was surrounded by music, and something about when your parents respect musicians. A lot of kids don't get that. A lot of kids really want to be musicians, and it's looked at as a hobby. That's not something that you do for a living. So I was really lucky in a lot of regards.
So they've been very supportive, right, from the word go?
Yeah, very much. I will say after I did the Michael Jackson Bad tour, my mother, being a motherly mother, said to me, "Well, now, honey, you need something to fall back on." And I had the great ammo right then, because I had seen, I think, Eddie Murphy on a talk show talking about if you have something to fall back on, you will.
That's right. That's good.
Right? So you're either all in or you're not.
Is that kind of like, and that's been your approach for kind of your whole career then, just that?
Yeah, I will say there were times I thought I should have listened to my mother, but so far so good. It's been a pretty lengthy career playing guitar.
So I was kind of reading a little bit about, so you're born in New York, but you moved to California, San Diego, and then eventually went to Guitar Institute of Technology. So how did that come about, that transition? Or were you playing in bands? How did this kind of obsession, I guess, so to speak, kind of develop?
This obsession developed from just being surrounded by it and really digging music and listening to it a lot and going to Tower Records. It was a whole family thing that we would just go there and look at the new records, and back when an album cover was a thing. So that was the obsession. Getting into GIT was a thing where I saw an ad that they put in Guitar Player magazine for a weekend symposium, and I ended up in the third class they ever had. So that ad that I saw was just trying to get the word out that there was a school in Hollywood. Not too many people knew about it. So I drove up for the weekend. It was a couple of days of workshops, person after person after person, and it was almost all jazz, and everything was over my head. But I was into the vibe of it, especially because they had a concert at the end of it where everybody played, and that was so inspiring. It was, in an alley, a back alley in Hollywood, and just the atmosphere of a summer night, and just beautiful players. I ended up taking a test to get into the school right then and flunked. even though I had taken lessons in music shops since I was 8 years old, um, I knew a lot of techniques, a lot of songs, but I was never given the tools of the trade. I didn't know diatonic scales. I didn't know chord scales. One of the things I was asked to play was a G major 7 chord. And I played first position G dominant 7 because I didn't know the difference. So I was sent back to get my act together and studied with a jazz player named Peter Sprague in San Diego. And he had me learning John Coltrane solos and Charlie Parker and getting my chord scales together and scale patterns. So that really stepped me up to a whole other level. I had a lot of work to do every week before I saw him. And 6 months later, I got into the school.
Wow. What was the scene like back then? I mean, was it pretty, competitive, or I mean, I think it would be quite different than it is now.
Yeah, I don't remember it as being that competitive. There was only 60 students, two classes of 30 each. Now there's thousands. The school has moved, I think, at least 4 times and just keeps expanding, and lots of students from every country you can imagine. But back then, it was a cool vibe. We were just all into guitar, and that was the era of Al Di Meola and George Benson, and I was really into jazz at that time. I wanted to be the next Pat Martino, and needless to say, things evolved and paths shifted and changed over the years.
And so, what year is this that we're talking about when you were going there?
I graduated March '79. It was a year-long school at that point, and it was really intense to the point where future classes, they were losing so many people that they stretched that curriculum out into a year and a half.
Oh, wow. So, wow. And so when I was just reading a little bit, a lot of the, this is kind of where you really started with the two-handed tapping technique from a classmate, Steve Lynch. And Van Halen's up and coming this time, and I've read some things that he borrowed a lot from Harvey Mandel. Were you kind of aware of Eddie, or that even was on even the radar, or were you just all jazz and kind of just was coming up this on your own? It's always a kind of a thing that comes up, like, Eddie's the first, but that kind of find out, it came from a lot of different places.
Yeah, and he says he doesn't claim he was the first, but he took it the furthest.
Sure.
Especially at the early '80s. That point, we used to get a seminar once a month by different really heavy players: Pat Metheny, Lee Ritenour, Larry Carlton, people that were in the studio scene in Hollywood. And one month we got a clinic by Emmett Chapman, who invented the Chapman stick. And if you're not familiar with it, it's just a big neck. It's got 5 bass strings, 5 melody strings, tuned in fourths or fifths. And, there was 60 students. 59 of us were thinking, yeah, that's really cool, but we're just trying to get down these 6 strings in this tuning, But it planted a seed in Steve Lynch's mind. And so he started experimenting with what can you do with 2 hands on the neck? And he developed a way that made a lot of sense to me. And I thought what he was doing was so fresh. I couldn't wait to jump in, but the school was so intense. I couldn't do any extracurricular studies till we graduated. And he played a tapping solo at graduation that floored me. And I asked him to send me demos of stuff he was working with, that he worked out. And so back then I got a cassette and I tried to learn his solos, and I didn't know at that time he was using 3 fingers of the right hand, and I was just using one, and it sounded like crap, and I had a blister. So I went to his house to take a lesson, and then then I understood what was going on, and that was all I needed to start exploring. Now, at that same time, the first Van Halen record was out, and I was trying to be a jazz bow. And I remember towards the end of the year, somebody put Eruption in on my head with headphones really loud, and I wasn't having it. It didn't make an impact back then. I was just in a completely different headspace. And, of course, I heard more and more about Van Halen and started listening a little bit. And my attitude back then was, I mean, some of the lyrics are so misogynistic, and I was thinking, but I'm a jazz player now.
Right.
Well, it took a while. I'm always take a while. I just got Nirvana last year. Takes a while to seep into the bloodstream, but when I got it big. And I remember I was playing a jazz gig in San Diego, and it wasn't fun. I wasn't having a good time. And during a break, I went out to my car and I put on Mean Street, and I played the intro to that over and over, and that was the end of jazz for me. Just that intro was so innovative and wicked and wild and animalistic, and that's probably, the Guinness Book of World Records for feedback. That is the ultimate right there. And I just went on a new trajectory ever since then. They kind of went from jazz to funk, fusion, and then I ended up in a cover band and just kind of went back and forth with different genres. And that's why my first record is all over the map. I got Giant Steps on there and Flight of the Bumblebee and clean tapping solos. It was just kind of an experiment of everything I was into.
So, okay, then after graduation, you're kind of, that moment, like, are you standing on the street, like, okay, what do I do with this? Like, where am I going to take this? Leading up to kind of your big break with Michael Jackson, you're starting to get some notoriety in, like, in guitar, magazines and so forth. Like, how did that come about, and just that whole process? I mean, no, it probably wasn't easy.
I would say it's dreams and ignorance got me there. I just had a vision of what could be. And for a long time there, like back to Van Halen, I remember I cut out a picture that was in a magazine. It was black and white, a picture of them from behind at the end of a show. I'm guessing in Rio, because it looked like there was 100,000 people in the stadium, and Eddie and Roth are jumping up in the air, and the energy of that, I captured that in my brain, and I made a custom keychain out of it that I would carry around forever. So it's kind of like a visualization practice. I mean, people sell courses on that kind of stuff now, but I just did it naturally, where I had that in my mind, and I would go to shows all the time. So I knew the energy of being at a show and being excited about who's on stage and how the audience would go nuts. And I just envisioned myself playing for a lot of people. It wasn't any specific band. It's just I wanted to be on stage and be successful. So eventually, from San Diego, I moved back to LA in 1984, and ended up, by the time I got the Jackson gig in 87, I was playing in 5 different bands and teaching 6 or 7 days a week. So I was immersed in nothing but guitar. And I think it's kind of what you have to do to get where you're going. You just immerse yourself, and you automatically pull things to you by putting that energy out into the universe.
I think that's just what you mentioned about the visualization. I think that's so key, and I've seen that happen in my life. So I've done the exact same thing, where you're just that photo of, like, that's you, that's your image of the, your viewpoint of the world. And it is funny how things just kind of, in their own little way, kind of line up. Yeah. So I was doing a little research about, and was very curious about your audition for Michael Jackson, and how that came about, how you found out about it, got it, and you did it a little differently than everybody else. You kind of came in with a strategy, in that you were kind of like the very last one to audition, and that was kind of intentional.
I don't know if I was last, and it wasn't a cattle call where everybody was in a pile waiting for their turn. Everybody had time slots. So I just wanted time to work on the stuff, which was about 3 days. And I just canceled everything and just worked on his top hits, and to get those repetitions in. So when I got in there, I would feel strong and prepared. And when I showed up, there was no band. It was just me and a guy with a video camera, and Michael would look at the videotapes after. So at least I didn't have the pressure of him watching me play. That would have been kind of daunting. And I did have the advantage of, at that time in 1987, I was playing a lot of shows in Hollywood, Sunset Strip, that kind of stuff, and because of Eruption and Cathedral and all Van Halen's solo pieces, I mean, he was the top of the game back then and still is really. But every band had a solo spot for the guitarist because of that. So I had a lot of practice playing alone in that environment. So when I went in, the only guidance I was given was to play some funky rhythm because that'd be 95% of my job for the show. And I had been teaching a lot of funk kind of stuff. At that time, I was a teacher at I can't remember when it changed from GIT to Musicians Institute. Somewhere along the way, I was teaching there. And I was teaching some funk stuff. So I played stuff that I had been playing already. And then I started improvising kind of a rock bass solo vibe. Then I had done 3 demos for my first record. And one of them was Giant Steps. And it was John Coltrane's Giant Steps with a lot of chord changes. And I had worked out a tapping solo for that. So I played that. And I had also been playing Beat It in a cover band for 2 or 3 years. So I thought, well, he might find that useful. So I ended the audition with that.
That was another thing, curious, because this is like, pre-internet, all the tools. I mean, how did you figure that solo out?
That solo kicked my ass. I gave up like 3 times because there was so many new techniques the very first note like comes out of hell. It's almost like he's got the bar down on the body of the guitar. So the strings are completely lax. And then he brings it up into the atmosphere. The tapping stuff, the harmonics, I couldn't figure out for a hot minute. Back then it was the cassette days, and there was a company called Marantz that made a cassette recorder for musicians that you could slow down the motor. So you could take it down an octave. You could take it down any amount of speed, but because it was analog, it would also change the key. So then you had to transpose the key. So I think I just took it down a whole octave. And after giving up 3 times, I finally got it. And then I played it, every week in the cover band. And I tell you what, it was really interesting because I loved playing it on the cover band scene. There was just a feeling to that. There was a lot of emotion behind his feel. I mean, he had such a unique feel. And when I started playing it with Michael, that whole thing was stripped away. It was like I was playing the notes, but it didn't feel the same. And I thought at first it was because, now instead of 50 people, I'm playing for 50,000 people. The anxiety of that, or having the laser lights on my head and the environment was night and day different from what I was used to. But about a month in, I got a copy of a live show. And then I understood and compared the live tempo to the recorded tempo, and it was night and day different. We played it so much faster live, like a lot of songs, that it really kind of sucked the feeling out of the solo. And if Eddie had been given that tempo that we played live, he would have improvised a completely different solo. So although I was happy to play that solo, I kind of wish it had been at the original tempo.
And so what was the rehearsals like preparing for that? Was Michael a bit of a taskmaster, or did you just kind of trust everybody to show up and do your thing, or was it a pretty tight knit kind of setup?
He had expectations. He was at the top of the game, and he wanted people to do their homework. So we did it. Right. Rehearsals for the Bad Tour were the most intense of any of the tours, and for 1 month the band was in one room by themselves, and techs. And then dancers in one room, singers in another room. And we basically rehearsed the live tapes from the Victory Tour that he had done with his brothers. And that tour happened after Thriller, after all that success. So obviously there was a lot of Michael songs in that, not just the brothers. But so we learned that in part because of the tempos that he wanted to do live, and in part because the forms were extended for dance sequences. So it was better than learning it from the record. Um, and then the second month, we got together with Michael and all the special effects on a huge soundstage. So they could shoot off pyro and have the lasers and whatever other effects that he had, bombs, you know.
Things that I didn't talk about, or teach at the GIT.
You got that right. I was not prepared for. There was one thing in the Bad tour. We did Heartbreak Hotel, and I would run to the front of the stage for the solo, and I was supposed to take my guitar neck and act as if I was triggering this fireball. And I remember Michael and I went out front when the pyro guy first showed us what it would look like, and we were, God, I want to say 75 to 100 feet at least out from the stage, and the heat from that fireball. I thought, how am I going to be 12 feet from that thing? And I honestly, the whole tour, I never saw the fireball. I would do this with the guitar and turn my head the other way, and I could feel that heat, but I didn't want to see it.
And that was a long tour. I mean, it was like a year and a half or something.
Yeah,
he was at the top of his game, obviously. I mean, I have a confession to make. Christmas morning, 1987. I ripped open my first present, and there it was, Bad on vinyl, my very first album.
Oh, really? Wow.
I still have it here somewhere. And
yeah, well, on that tour, we when we took off, Bad had been released, and Just Can't Stop Loving You. I think only those two singles. So that's all we played from Bad. And then after a year and a half, singles were being released, to the point where we were able to go back to Japan, where we started in September 1987, and we finished in, I want to say 1989. It was a long tour, going back with a whole different show.
Wow.
On the same tour.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
And so when that ended, was it then you actually, that's when you did your first solo record, correct? It was right after.
Yeah, I had done 3 demos with Michael Sembello producing, and he was shopping a record deal, and then Michael Jackson came, so it was all on pause for a year and a half. And when I came back, ended up finishing it, which took a hell of a long time because, it was an instrumental record, and it was 1/10 of the budget and some of the other pop acts that were going through that studio. And I was recording at the same time that Gerardo was recording his debut record. And it was also the debut for the Interscope Records. And so they put like $1 million into it because they were going to make sure it was a huge success because it was launching the album. And that song, Rico Suave, it was huge. It was everywhere. Mm-hmm. So Gerardo got all the daylight hours, and I never started before 2 a.m. I got all the crap hours, and my house was like a heroin den because I needed to sleep during the day, and I put aluminum foils on the windows to try to get some rest. And I was always supposed to start at midnight, but never started before 2 or 3. And I don't have a good memory of that time.
And I have my first memory of you actually is watching the halftime Super Bowl. And I remember, and I was just getting into guitar, and I just remember going, my God, who is that? She's awesome. She's like crazy. Like, I mean, just remember like the hair and just the whole 9 yards, and just it being just so over the top. And I mean, that was right when I got into guitar. And so it was just, incredibly exciting and just the biggest thing ever, I mean, I know a lot of people like, say, playing the halftime show is, an amazing gig, but what was it really like? I mean, it was just like a blur, and we're playing for like 500 million people. I mean, what's kind of going through your mind, before you step up to the stage?
Well, I'll say it's the only time I really felt Michael nervous. I mean, that kind of pressure, who wants that? If there's a screw up, it's there forever. Granted, it was before the internet, but now that the internet's here, it's like you can dial it up at any day of the week. I knew it was going out to a lot of people, and we were in a stadium of 50,000, but I didn't know it was going to be 1.5 billion people that like the entire planet tuned in to see that. It was really fun because it was so different from what we were doing. There was a lot of medleys because there's a very condensed amount of time that you can play. So he took his hits and chopped them into medleys. One thing I remember that was so shocking is when we first plugged in, the music was in an empty stadium, right? We were rehearsing, and the sound hitting the side of the stadium, there was a delay that was so bad that the dancers couldn't dance. I didn't realize that the sound engineer actually has to put a delay in there to compensate for it so you can hear the music as it should be heard.
Huh.
And I didn't know a lot of the stuff that was going to happen. I only knew what the band had rehearsed. And so when the show starts off and there's an impersonator in the scoreboard, I'm looking off like, holy crap, I didn't know that. And then you hear another explosion, then the same thing happens on the other side. And all the kids at the end that had the cards for Heal the World, I didn't know that was going to happen. It was kind of a surprise for me.
Slash was joined you, didn't he?
No,
Or
not there.
Was that another show or something? I
Yeah,
somehow remember that somewhere.
He joined us in Spain for Black or White. And that's another thing. I never got the memos, right? I show up for sound check, and all of a sudden I see all these Les Pauls where my guitars usually were. And I'm like, what the hell's going on? Then I find out that he's going to play that night. And it was really kind of funny because they changed the staging, because normally I would only go up front for 12, 16 bar highlights. So they changed the choreography, so I was on the stage the whole time. I banged my head so hard it hurt for a week. It was just crazy. And one of the things that was supposed to happen was we were in the center of the stage, and then at one point Michael would run over to stage left where there was a giant fan underneath, so everybody's hair would blow up. And Slash forgot. And so I grabbed him. I grabbed him really hard he had, I think, like a bomber jacket. And I grabbed him, and it was like grabbing a tree. He wasn't going to move. So I'm like, hey, you're on your own. And I just ran over to Michael. That's live. You never know what's going to happen.
That's awesome. So one thing I want to kind of talk about that I kind of geek out on is your time with Jeff Beck. And you not only toured with him, but you recorded with him. Who else? And what Mama said was that intro. That's kind of when I was kind of got, let's say, whatever, got out of Jeff Beck. But I just remember kind of hearing that, and it was such a modern sounding guitar record, where he was like really kind of, that's always Jeff Beck, trying to push the envelope. How did that come about? Did you just get a phone call like, hello, I'm Jeff Beck, come play? Or was it just, various exchanges? And
I just wanted to meet him because I had been so into his music. I memorized every solo on 2 records, Blow by Blow and Wired. And he was and still remains the top guitar player for me, just connected to something different that is far beyond the average. I knew, well, there was one of the keyboard players that was on the Bad Tour, Rory Kaplan, had done some tech work with Jeff when he was out with Jan Hammer. And he knew I was really into Jeff, so he goes, oh, I'll connect you guys. Well, he didn't do it. So I thought, okay, the Dangerous Tour comes along, and I know we're going to England, and I know Jeff lives in England, so how hard can it be? So every show that we did, I would talk to the Sony reps that were there afterwards and say, I really want to meet Jeff. Can you arrange it? And one of them came up with it. They got him VIP tickets, and we were playing at Wembley Stadium. We did multiple nights, like, 8, 10, 12 nights there at the same spot, which not too many acts can pull off. So Jeff came to the show, and we had done, there was 2 opening acts went on, and then Michael canceled the show. I don't remember why. He was sick or I don't know. So 80,000 people are leaving the stadium pissed off, kids crying, and I'm thinking Jeff is in the VIP tent, and I'm not going to let this moment pass. So all these guys are going out this way, and I'm going across them with my hair up like this, which in hindsight was pretty dangerous because they were not happy. And it turns out that Jeff never made it in. He arrived at the gate after the announcement happened and they turned him away. So I called him up the next day and said, I don't know when or if they're going to make up the show, but can I meet you anyway? And he said, sure. So I went down maybe the next day to a studio in London that he was recording his rockabilly record at, and had my video camera, the big honking video camera back then, with a dead battery. And so I took my spare battery, and that lasted 10 seconds. And I did capture enough of his playing to go, oh, that's how he's doing that. Oh, man. So during the time that I spoke with him, I had my first CD out at that time, Above, Below, and Beyond. So I gave that to him. And I also had just been given a copy of an interview I had done for MTV in England, where I did the Flight of the Bumblebee video was there, and I had done an interview, and they kind of connected it into one video and gave it to me. I had a couple copies, so I gave one to him too. And I thought, great, I made my connection. I got my autograph. I'll probably never see him again. Although I will say at the end of that meeting, he drove me back to my hotel in his Corvette at 1,000 miles an hour, like Batman. Which, I thought, okay, if I'm going to die, this is a really good way to go. She died in a fiery crash with Jeff Beck. Yeah, as long as there's 100 yards in front of him, he's flooring it. So I thought I'd never see him again. And he called me a couple months later and said, I finally had a chance to listen to your record and let's record together. And it just blew my mind. Completely unexpected. And in true Beck form, it wasn't 5 years before it happened.
It took 5 years to put that together? Or 5 years until it happened? Until it happened,
yeah. He went on a couple different tours in the meantime. He went out with Santana at one point and some other tour. And I would see him backstage and he'd say, we're still going to do this thing. And I thought, I know how it is to be inspired in the moment and then a year later you're into something else. But he never forgot it. And he eventually called me and said, hey, I got booked a tour in Italy. He wanted to take a new band into smaller venues to get us up to speed before he did Japan and America. And it was weird because he had never played with me. At that point, I had 2 records out, so he was going on the strength of 2 records. So that happened after the History Tour. I had another record that came out just before the History Tour. And so I was going to Italy anyway for a session. And just for my own peace of mind, I booked myself to London and I learned the Guitar Shop record, most of it, so I could play that in his presence to make sure he wasn't nuts, because I didn't tell anybody that I was up for the gig. Zero, nobody. I remember I was even in this conversation with Robert Knight, who's a really famous photographer since Hendrix days and shot Jeff since the 60s. And he was talking about Jeff and what he's up to, and I would not say a word about it. And after the fact, he goes, I can't believe you didn't tell me you were going to go out with him. So I waited until I was on tour to let people know about it.
You want to jinx it?
Yeah, I did the same with Michael Jackson. I didn't tell anybody, which was tough because I had to keep subbing out all my work, all my teaching and whatever else I had going on. It's just can't make it. And I remember I had one student that was so pissed off that I abandoned her and went on tour with Michael. Sorry.
For Michael Jackson.
How dare you? Yeah.
It's crazy. Well, just quick on Jeff, what was, I guess, the biggest takeaway? I mean, you finally kind of get a chance to get inside his head a little bit. I mean, did that ever kind of happen? Were there some kind of big takeaways that,
Yeah, there was a lot of takeaways. Of course, playing music with him was great, but hearing his opinions on those long bus rides when we were listening to music, many, many hours in the studio. Like he did one song called Blackbird, where I think it was the producer's idea for him to have a conversation between live recorded bird samples and guitar. And he was listening to the birds, and he had just finished lunch, and he had a spoon by him by on the couch, and I was sitting next to him. He picks up the spoon and he has the guitar on his lap, and he just takes the spoon and puts it on the string and goes, which sounded like a bird. It was, who thinks of stuff like that? Well, Jeff did. And that wasn't the first or last time. And just sometimes I would think, okay, I've been here 5 hours. You really don't need another guitar player on a Jeff Beck record, although thankfully he put me on a bit. But invariably, there was some piece of wisdom every single day that I go, that's why I was here today, to hear what he just said. It's his records. One of the things he said, if the drums are right and grooving, you don't need much else, which is such a Zen thing to say. I mean, you talk to all the shredders of the 80s where every record had everything they got. Here's me shredding, and here's another track of me shredding. Mm-hmm. So, and whereas Jeff was pretty much the opposite and very Zen, and would give a song exactly what it needed and no more. So at the end of a record, you want more. And he never wanted to repeat himself. He'd get really stressed out about, oh God, why do I have to do another record? Is there really a good reason to do this? And and then he'd put it out, and it was nothing like the last one, nothing like the next one. He was always and continues to stretch himself beyond what most anybody does.
Yeah, I mean, I saw him a few years back, open for ZZ Top, and I thought my head was going to explode.
I saw that tour.
Yeah, it just felt so, I mean, it was kind of late afternoon, and it was just so like, I mean, it literally just felt like, it was just so from another planet.
Yeah, he's, that's a tall order too, to take an instrumental guitarist and keep you engaged for 90 minutes. Mm-hmm. And he would just bring you into the story because he was so connected to it. I remember, honestly, one rehearsal I will never forget because it freaked me the hell out, where I was listening to his playing so intently that I lost what I was doing myself. Honestly, and it's funny because he caught me. It's like he almost knew the connection that was happening. He was always in front of me, right, on stage, and the band to the side or back a little bit. And he did this windy ass lick, and it literally took my body, and I went like, I went with him physically. And he looks back and he catches me, and at that time I'm like, I don't know what I'm playing. And ever since then, I had to not listen so intently. I would start listening to him in more like clusters of energy rather than individual notes. That's the only way I could pay attention to what I was doing.
And I can see that was probably a big influence because you have your multimedia show now, and again, keeping that, engagement. So I kind of wanted to talk about that a little bit of kind of what you've been doing, because you're busy. You're always doing something, and same with Jeff Beck, it's not just one thing. I mean, you're a session performer. So I'm just kind of curious of, Pat, I mean, you actually, I was even looking up, you even did Circle LA for a while. I think, I can see the Michael Jackson influence, coming up there. So yeah, I'm just kind of curious about the, past few years with touring and teaching, and kind of talking a little bit about what to expect at Sunday Guitars at the clinic.
Well, at this point in my life, you get a culmination of everything I've done. I started, oh gosh, maybe a dozen years ago now. Oh, longer than that. Jesus, now it's been 20 since I've been with Jeff. I did Michael Jackson 10 years, and then I played 3 years with Jeff Beck. And I remember a moment at home after that where I was thinking, okay, well, that's my bucket list, and I'm not dead. So now what do I do? And I started thinking of, okay, it's time to do my own music. I got 3 records out now, and I've never toured my own music. And I started envisioning what that would be like. And I started thinking, of all this neuroses from dealing with other humans and things that could go wrong and people that whine on the road and complain. And I go, there's got to be a way, at least in the beginning, that I can tour on my own. And I had done plenty of clinics where I played with tracks, which is great in a clinic format, but I thought as a show, it's not going to cut it. You need more entertainment than that. So that's where I came up with the film show idea. And I put out the word for a year and a half for filmmakers to make me films for tracks for my newest record. And people are flaky. People are super flaky. After all that time, I ended up with 4 films. That's it. But one of the guys, the first guy that turned in a film, showed me how to do it. And I became super obsessed with filmmaking and just created this multimedia show so I could go out alone and have entertainment value without a band. So I have, in the beginning, it was a lot of black and white films because it was free. I could chop them up and cut them to the beat. I do a cover of Billie Jean with the Shirley Temple film, and I can change the speed so she dances to the beat of what I need it to be. And I've just grown and grown and grown as a filmmaker. And at the same time, the internet has provided more and more footage. In the very beginning, it cost a ridiculous amount of money to get like 5 seconds of Zulu dancers. Now you get these subscription sites for $150 a year, and it's unlimited access to all these different clips. Really, really well shot, high res things that would be better than anything I could do on my own. So when you see my show, it goes from anywhere from old scratchy monster movies, black and white from the 50s, to really high res current stuff. So not only does the music run a gamut of different textures, but the films do too. And I find as a bonus that I can keep the attention of little kids that would never sit through an instrumental guitar show. Mom, I want to go. But they're engaged the whole time, which is kind of thrilling. And at the same time, just watching me play guitar, once you've seen one song, I don't do any costume changes. It pretty much looks the same for the rest. Although
I next.
No, I do tell stories. And in general, like at 5-star, it's going to be a little different because I have a clinic and then later I have a show. So at the clinic, I don't want to show the videos that I normally play with. But if it was a one-off clinic, I would have the videos played in sync and then talk about techniques and sounds between the songs. And in the show, I tell stories about the songs. So it's a very different vibe. So I hope people will see both. I hope the guitar nerds will come and hear about the sounds and techniques that I use. And I'm starting to incorporate. I have an online thing I launched this summer called Guitar Cloud Symposium. And that is a 4-day extravaganza for guitar lovers. It's kind of like a smorgasbord of everything you can imagine from, it depends who all the teachers are. I have 4 people, and I, for instance, start out the 4 days with brain science and the ultimate way to learn. Then I get into an app that I think is the best way to learn any tune called Transcribe. Then I'll get into different techniques. I'm doing intervallic playing or tapping, and I'm changing it up every time to keep it fresh, adding new modules and deleting other ones. But I got 3 other teachers as well. And this time it's Gretchen Menn, Vicky Genfan, that's really into acoustic tapping. And she's the only one of us that sings. And Angela Petrilli is the newest addition. And she's got the social media marketing down. So you get all these different modules, 24 modules in 4 days. And then I'm launching a new thing November 14th that it's called Deep Dive. And that's just a 1-day thing. But we're all teaching 90-minute modules on aspects of creating your own record. So it's just like everything I've learned over the years and things I continue to learn. The best way you can learn is to rehash it and learn it so well that you can teach it. And I completely lost track of your original question and just went off on a tangent.
Oh no, that was great. That actually kind of answered my question. I guess just for those that will be attending, I mean,
Yeah.
Bend is a very guitar town, and for those that are going to be attending the clinic, what would you say they can expect to walk away from? You know.
Well, my number one goal from both clinics and shows is to inspire people. If I can give you if I just plant a single little seed of something that you can take home to your own playing, then that's a success. And answer any questions that people have. I love to talk about sounds. I love, especially because I'm an instrumental player, I like to use a lot of sounds to keep things interesting. And I like to make the melodies as vocal as possible. I use whammy pedal to do bending and as well as the tremolo bar. So I'll break down some aspects of the tunes that I'm going to demo. And, you know, I found when I go to other people's clinics, sometimes they'll say something that they don't think is anything because they know it. And I'll go, wow, like now I'm seeing things in a whole other way. So inspiration is my goal.
Awesome. Well, I'm certainly inspired. I mean, I can just see just the energy, you know, and the love, you know, and the excitement, you know, that you still have for the instrument.
Yeah.
It's like it doesn't, you know, we just lost, you know, Eddie, you know, a few weeks ago, and you know, just seeing the outpouring of like, you know, I'm like a third generation. You know, I was, you know, in the sense of I kind of came just by when I was born, but I mean, my brother was a drummer, so we played Van Halen tunes. We never went to high school. We just played Van Halen tunes in a room, and that was it, you know. And so just seeing that resurgence almost of like the guitars, and it's like it's never went away, but it does definitely feel like, oh, I thought, you know, it was kind of quiet on that end, but it was really, really cool to see.
Yeah, well, it's always the same with humans that you don't know what you got till it's gone. You know, and people are looking back, and I think maybe the newest generation coming up playing guitar doesn't even realize some of the things he invented. They just see other people doing it. It's like dancing, or I see so many dancers. I go, that's a Michael Jackson move. That's from Michael. That's from Michael. That's from Michael. You don't have anything original there. You know? But he gave us so much, and he was so prolific in every regard. Not just the guitar techniques, but his writing style, how he would really create a story. You know, with the digital age, you get a verse, you can copy paste, and verse, chorus, solo out, and he would take you somewhere else. Like sometimes just the intro to a song would set a mood that you would never hear that harmony or that progression again for the whole tune. It was just, I'm bringing you here, and now I'm going to bring you over here. And sometimes in the middle of the song, it would break down to halftime, and by the time you're done with the song, you felt like you went somewhere. That's a real skill.
Well, and he was all about the groove too with the drums.
Yeah. Some of that was pretty borderline prog, where you think you're hearing the downbeat one place and it's not there at all. In fact, I don't know where I stashed it, but I've done several interviews. I did one with Dweezil that I don't think is out yet. It was a 2-hour interview on the 1984 record. And I insisted on doing that one because I wrote out every note of every solo. And it was really difficult because it's not like a jazz record where, I mean, saxophone is a different kind of thing, but a jazz guitar record, you're pretty much going to get 8th notes, 16th notes, triplets, and some combination of those. With Eddie, he'd do groups of 9, groups of 13, 15, whatever flurry he felt like, but he had such a intense internal clock that he always knew where one was, and he would land on his feet. But you didn't know. I mean, there was some tension there, like, is he going to make it? Is he going to make it? Yep, he always makes it.
That's a really great point. I mean, just falling down your stairs and landing on the feet kind of approach. Well, cool. Jennifer, I don't want to take too much of your time, but we're very excited to have you next week at Sunday Guitars, which is going to be Friday, November 6th, 2020, and starting at 3:30. My guest today is Jennifer Batten. And Jennifer, thank you so much for coming on and just giving just a great bit of inspiration to a great time in guitar history.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to playing because, with lockdown, we're not doing so many gigs. And I've had, since lockdown, this will be my fourth gig, and probably that's it for the year. And I tell you, every time I play, it feels like an exorcism because I just don't get to connect with people live like I'm used to. I had tours booked in the UK. I was supposed to go to Austria. I had something in the Frankfurt show in Germany, and Brazil and Mexico were supposed to happen this year, and boom, nothing. So the only connection I have with humans is on Zoom with my Guitar Cloud Symposium or doing interviews like this. So I'm really looking forward to it. Although I would tell people, don't get near me. It's kind of in this kind of situation with clinics and shows. Normally, I hang out with people afterwards if they want to buy CDs or whatever, shake hands, and no, I don't even want to do pictures because you're right next to somebody in their airspace. So I remember the first time somebody asked me to do a picture when I did an outdoor show. I'm like, what are you thinking? You're going to have to get really far back so your son and I can be 6 feet apart. So if that's the kind of picture you want with a mask on, have at it. But I think it's best to just wait until things unlock.
For sure. And this is not your first time to Bend. You were here a few years back.
Yeah, I come out occasionally. I played in some of the clubs. I can't remember the names of anything ever. But yeah, I love going out there. It's fun.
Awesome. Well, we're excited to have you. Once again, I'm Andrew with the Guitar Rose podcast, and my special guest today is the legendary, wonderful Jennifer Batten. Jennifer, thanks so much, and we'll see you in Bend.
All right, sounds good.
All right.
Take care.
Take care.